My name is Mike Wolf. I am a staff member of the Public Land and Resource Law Review, and I'm pleased to introduce our last three panelists this morning. This panel is entitled Consumer Choices in the New Energy Economy, and they're going to be discussing demand-side energy issues, focusing on the role of law and policy in providing incentives for consumers to use energy more efficiently and choose renewable supplies. First off, we have Mr. John Volkman from the Energy Trust of Oregon, where he is General Counsel. The Energy Trust of Oregon invests in energy conservation and renewable energy projects in Oregon. Mr. Volkman has practiced natural resource law in a private firm with the federal government and the Northwest Power Planning Council. He's a member of the Columbia Basin Consultant to the Western Water Policy Review Advisory Commission and a visiting scholar at the Western Governors Association. After Mr. Volkman, we have Mr. Pat Corcoran, who's the Vice President of Governmental and Regulatory Affairs for Northwestern Energy. He joined Northwestern Energy in 1979. Pat was named Manager of Rates in 1984 and became Director of Regulatory Affairs in 1997 and was named Executive Director in 1999 and then assumed his role as Vice President in 2001. And then finally we have Chuck McGraw, who is an attorney practicing in Helena. Mr. McGraw works on energy issues in Montana and the region, representing the Natural Resource Defense Council and the Renewable Northwest Project, a regional group dedicated to the development of renewable resources, and the Human Resource Council, a low-income service provider based in Missoula, Montana. Please join me in welcoming Mr. John Volkman.
Okay, thanks. Well, thank you, Mike. Energy conservation and demand-side management are clearly one of the essential bridge strategies for this coming era, and clean energy era. And it's perhaps the most essential strategy, not only because it's clean, but there's a lot of it, and we know how to do it. We know how to do it, although it's not like installing a scrubber on a smokestack or some other kind of technology. You need to persuade people, you need incentives to help persuade people to make the kinds of investments that you need for demand-side management to work. In the Northwest, though, we've been a leader in this for going on 25 years, 27 years now, since the Northwest Power Act was adopted in 1980. And we really have done a lot of energy conservation in that time. Northwest Power Act, just to refresh your recollections if you don't remember this, is that really one of the very first times energy conservation was treated as a resource that could be developed like any other energy resource. And in 1980, when the Northwest Power Council was just getting started, they tried to get an idea of how much was out there from that perspective. And they thought that there was, over the 20-year period, 1980 to 2000, was something like 3,600 average megawatts, a lot of energy conservation out there to be had that was cost-effective, less costly than other energy alternatives, and that was truly available. Now, in fact, in 2000, we looked at what we'd done. What we got was about 1,800 average megawatts of energy. So a lot less than the 3,600 that we saw in 1980, but still quite a lot. And in fact, since the year 2000, we've ramped things up. We've saved another 1,300 average megawatts. So we're getting up toward that 3,600 average megawatt number, not as quickly as we'd hoped. 3,100 average megawatts, which is what we had saved as of 2006, is about enough energy to power the entire state of Idaho and western Montana. So that's a lot. If we had had to generate that kind of energy, we would have spent an additional $1.3 billion. These are Power Council numbers, but I think they're good. So we saved a lot of money by doing it that way. So we did a good job. We didn't get it all, and the fact that we didn't get it all cost us big time in the California energy crisis around 2000, 2001, when energy prices went through the roof and threatened blackouts were a real factor, and we're still paying the price of having to buy all that extremely expensive power around 2000. If we had done energy conservation to the degree that the Power Council was calling for in 1980, we would have saved a lot of money. So what happened? Why didn't we get it? That's sort of, that's my theme. I think some of what you'll hear from Pat Corcoran and Chuck McGraw will address it too. And I also want to be sure that the first question following the presentations goes to John Schertz, who's General Counsel of the Power Council here, who's going to talk about going forward, how do the Northwest Power Planning Councils, it's no longer the Power Planning Council, the Power and Conservation Council's plans look going forward? What role are they going to play? What role is Bonneville going to play in making sure that what's coming ahead is going to get more, better, faster in the way of demand-side management? So essentially what happened, you can graph how much energy was saved at different periods, but it looks like this. It went up and down depending on recessions in the economy, depending on restructuring discussions, a lot of outside influences that meant more or less money was going into energy conservation, demand-side management, depending on what was going on. The West Coast energy crisis hits, suddenly the investment goes way up in conservation. There's a little short-term memory loss following that where things fall off and that energy crisis is behind us. We're not looking ahead to the next one. Had it not been for these big fluctuations, we would have saved a lot more energy and we would have saved a lot more money. So how do we get there? When I think of this, I think of two models. One is California has managed to grow its economy rapidly, big influx of people, and keep its energy consumption essentially flat for several decades. And they've done it through utility energy conservation programs. They have, I think Pat can talk to you about what those utility conservation programs look like here. In California, they're a little different because, actually they're quite a bit different because the regulatory regime in California has been modified to give utilities not just to remove the disincentive from investing in conservation, but to give them an economic incentive to do conservation. And so those California programs are one model to look at if you're looking for regular, steady investment in energy conservation. And in the coming years, they're going to be greatly accelerating what they've done. So it's one to watch. Second model is my organization, Energy Trust of Oregon, which we are funded by, in different parts of the country, it's called a system benefits charge. In Oregon, it's called a public purposes charge. The two biggest investor-owned utilities in Oregon are required to collect a 3% charge on all utility rates, industrial, commercial, residential. That generates $60+ million a year. Most of that comes to Energy Trust of Oregon, which we then invest in energy conservation programs, and to a lesser degree in renewable energy projects. And we have different standards and criteria we use to administer that money, but it's a big hit of money, and it's steady, it's year in, year out. These are programs you can count on. And since we got up and running in about 2002, we've just on the energy efficiency side managed to save about 28 average megawatts a year, which is about twice as much as we estimate utility programs were able to do before. So that steady, predictable investment really makes a difference in what you can save. Even at that, we estimate that we've saved about 65% of what's really out there readily available. It is possibly the low-hanging fruit, or maybe not quite that easy, but there's a lot more out there that we could get if we had more money. And the Oregon legislature this year adopted a mechanism to allow that more money to come into our system. So I'm gonna cut my thing off there in the question period. If you have questions about the Energy Trust model, I'm happy to answer them. But I want to leave plenty of time for Pat and Chuck and John Schertz to talk about what's coming. So thank you very much.
Good morning. My name is Pat Corcoran. I'm the Vice President of Regulatory Affairs and Government Affairs for Northwestern Energy, and I've been with the company for a number of years, and as part of my responsibilities, I'm also responsible for energy efficiency, energy conservation, and the likes. And it's certainly a pleasure to be here this morning and address this group. I thought it'd be helpful to just give you a little bit of history about Northwestern Energy Company, and it's really in the form of a quick update. Our utility operations, we have 640,000 electric and gas customers in Montana, South Dakota, and Nebraska. Of course, the majority of those are in Montana. And, I've been involved in this business for a long time, but the last 10 years have certainly been a large period of turmoil for the utility in Montana. I think that's key to part of my presentation and discussion today, and it goes back to the former days of Montana Power Company. Their choice to pursue deregulation, which we all know was a huge failure in Montana, subsequent divestiture of the utility business to enter into telecom business, which Dutch America went bankrupt. The succeeding company, Northwestern Energy, that I worked for, bought Montana Power Company, had its own problems, went into bankruptcy. As a result of emerging from bankruptcy, they tried to sell the company to another company, BBI, an Australian firm, and as if any of you have paid close attention to that was denied by the Public Service Commission within the last 3 or 4 months. So here I am 10 years later, mostly gray because of it. And I think we're at a point, though, as a utility, we're at a crossroads. And, we're hoping that we can break through some of that history and start to move our company forward, including especially in the areas of energy efficiency and the kind of things we're talking about today. But key to a utility business like ours is need to be a financially strong utility to do the kind of things we need to do as a business for ourselves and for our customers. We seek out opportunities, for operational efficiency and cost control, to provide safe and reliable electric and natural gas service for our utility customers. We have to keep an eye on and look at transmission and distribution investments because they're the backbone of our system. New to ourselves because of the 2007 legislative session is an opportunity to build and own new generation facilities in Montana. Montana Power Company sold off all the generating assets. We own no generating facilities or natural gas producing properties, buy all that in the marketplace. So an important part of our future is starting to build and add new generating resources to start to fill some of the void that's part of our problem today. But key to this discussion, of course, is the environment and energy efficiency. As a company, we're committed to both of those. We want to take and do the right things and take the right steps and maintain and work on that ongoing commitment and be leaders in both of those areas. Montana Power, the former Montana Power Company, now Northwestern, we started doing energy efficiency and energy conservation matters in 1982. And we've been doing it over the years in a variety of different forms and fashions. We started with energy audits at that point in time. And Montana Power Company had a huge effort and staff to do those kinds of things. We went through the deregulation period that John was talking about. You know, we operated under the universal system benefits charge aspect of things, but that was probably a decline in programs and the likes. But now, you know, I think we're back on track where we're starting to move forward and to do, you know, the programs in a more effective and forward way. We run a variety of DSM programs that are available to residential, commercial, industrial, and irrigation customers. You know, we have broad program applicability, coverage, and eligibility. Comes in the form of a variety of incentives, energy audits. There's commercial programs like, you know, more motor control, refrigeration kinds of things and the likes. Our 2007 budget on the electric side, $6 million or higher depending on consumer interests. Natural gas DSM programs, something we've done at a fairly steady rate that have been more along the line of energy audits and certain amounts of insulation and the likes. That's an area where we're looking to expand a lot of our activities, because one of the things that we can look at there is more of, you know, our customers are combined gas and electric customers, so what you do for the electric benefits the gas and vice versa. Our 2007 budget is roughly $1 million. We have a natural gas DSM assessment study in process that we hope will define the future of those activities. Just a little bit on renewable energy. You know, Northwestern Energy contracted with a company called Invenergy to build the Judith Gap Wind Farm project, the first large-scale commercial wind project in Montana, 135 megawatts, a key part of our portfolio as far as renewable resources. Qualifying facilities, QF contracts, you know, we continue to add smaller ones of those. You can see that we have a couple wind facilities, a number of small hydro facilities, and there's a lot of others in the works or in the mill for those kinds of things. Small-scale renewable energy programs. Those programs largely continue to operate under the Universal Systems Benefit Charge program, and they're applicable or available to residential and mostly commercial customers. Include solar, wind, small hydro, geothermal, biomass. Have a very good program and interaction with a lot of the constituents around the state in running those programs. You can see some of the numbers there since 2002. We've had over 350 projects, about $3 million in USB grants, and our current 2007 budget is $650,000. When we start to think about law and policy, the current law and policy in Montana, of course there's the portfolio standards for renewable energy, you know, and the targets we need to meet in that regard going forward, you know, up to 15% in January of 2015. I think the Judith Gap Wind Project is roughly 7% of that target today. You know, we're interested in taking other steps to move those kinds of things forward, you know, and certainly have an interest in continuing to do those things. We have the statutes in Montana. Prior to the 2000 legislative session, we were what was called the default supplier, but with the 2007 legislative session, the deregulation laws in Montana have largely been removed from the books. So we're no longer the default supplier. We are the public utility providing conventional, fully bundled service, you know, the full obligation to serve, and that's standard. But part of our problem as a company, of course, is we're coming out of an era where we were the default supplier, own no generating facilities, completely at the mercy of the market. And so there's a different set of electric procurement policies or guidelines that have been established. They're rules codified under Montana law or as an extension of Montana law that provide the sideboards or the guidance to us as a company to pursue those. And that includes you know, the acquisition of cost-effective DSM as part of our default supply portfolio. You know, there's provisions in law for net metering and interconnection standards for renewable energy systems that we operate under. And then, you know, I think we all have some ongoing interest or wonder about future federal legislation. And I think something in that line looms in the future, and I can talk about that in a little bit. Under the existing incentives that at least we operate under today, you know, we have annual DSM programs that are recovered through our annual electricity supply tracker. Those costs are reviewed and recovered on an annual basis subject to a prudence review. We currently have a lost revenue mechanism pilot program in place. That's one of the tools to provide incentive to the utility. What a lost revenue mechanism means is that for every kilowatt hour we save of DSM, we lose 1 kilowatt hour of revenue recovery for our distribution and transmission system. And so what the lost revenue mechanism does, it makes up for those lost transmission and distribution revenues, because those are the revenues that are associated with keeping the wires and the pipes and that system up and in place. And that's temporarily in place and subject to future reviews by the Montana Public Service Commission. From a consumer standpoint, the programs that we offer have a variety of incentives and rebates available. You know, there's certain tax credits available, and of course there's lower energy bills. Other stakeholder support from Chuck and that group and others, renewable energy, low-income advocates. I point out here that they're indirectly supportive. I think they're very supportive of the actives and the programs that we do, but that's an area where that I think that there's more advocacy can be done by all people that are interested in energy conservation with regard to the programs and the likes and the things that we can do as a company and as a state. Part of our problem, and I'll talk about this in a little later, is there are a number of other stakeholders that are either critical or silent about energy conservation and renewables and the efforts of Northwestern Energy and their associated activities in cost recovery. The future as we see it today, at least the short-term future from a utility standpoint, continued full cost recovery of DSM program cost, continuation today of the lost revenue recovery mechanism. It's a tool that continues to help us with our efforts. We want to express a willingness to explore other mechanisms. John, you were talking about some of the other models. We've been talking with Chuck and Ralph Cavanna, who couldn't be here today, in that regard as well. New generation is a key part of our activities, and let me just talk about two of them. A gas-fired resource is an important tool that we need in our portfolio to deal with existing wind and future wind resources. And the gas-fired unit is something that can ramp up and down and help us deal with the variability in wind and the associated activities for that. The problem we have today as a company in buying those types of resources in the market, they don't necessarily exist, or they're drying up. And because of that, the prices we need to pay for something that's called ancillary services, a product that can vary with the wind, are becoming more and more expensive because of supply and demand. As a company, we're going to need baseload resources in the future. We're at the mercy of the market in PPL Montana today for those baseload resources. I think there's probably a place in our portfolio for baseload resources. It's probably coal, but it's clean coal. As a company, we're not we're willing to look at those kind of things, but the technology needs to be developed and tested. We're not a place as a company that we can do that ourselves. Federal legislation is probably going to be important with regard to providing funding or incentives to prove out things like IGCC or whatever else the case might be, so that there could be a technology that might provide some opportunities for a baseload resource in the future. And there's more of a debate for that to come. The consumers, I think we need to find ways to continue the utility programs incentives. There's tax credits, of course, both from an energy conservation standpoint as well as renewable resources, and then lower energy bills. A point that I would make right here, from a Montana Power Company standpoint over the years and now Northwestern Energy, I consider ourselves as having been and still being the leader in these areas, whether it be from an energy efficiency standpoint or from a renewable energy standpoint. Low-income energy assistance I would throw in there as well, because it's part of the packages we provide from an energy efficiency standpoint for the low-income community. But in my mind, there's an equity issue. There are many other utility players in the state, whether it's the other utilities or including the rural electric cooperatives, that I think as a state could do more and do things better. And so while we continue to provide, I believe, leadership in these areas, that's not to suggest that we can't do more or that we can't do things better, because we can, and we're willing to do that and explore those kinds of things. But at the end of the day, cost recovery, the means to be a financially strong utility in order to provide those services, and have certainty that if we make those types of investments, we will recover the costs. They're an important part of the needs of us as a company. But we can't be expected as the major utility in the state of Montana to be the only one being asked or called on to provide and operate these types of programs. So, I think, as yourselves or others, there are other opportunities in the state, other players that should be probably part of those discussions. Finally, what I want to talk about is something called barriers. In my mind, from a utility standpoint, in particular our own unique standpoint, because of the history of where we're at today, I think there are certain barriers that we need to deal with as a company before we can get too far down the path of thinking about other structures that might be more like a disincentive or a reward, risk-reward type of structure. John, where you're talking about there's mechanisms where you get an incentive for doing more, but you might be penalized if you don't meet your targets. We need to have an environment that we can operate in where you can have some assurance and that there's an equilibrium on both sides of the equation with regard to those incentives and disincentives to a company if you're going to be expected to operate in that type of an environment. Part of our problem, of course, today is distrust, the distrust of the public utility as a result of both the history and perception of the last 10 years. For a lot of good reasons. It's not to suggest that, that a lot of things have happened. It takes a long time to rebuild and earn that trust. But that's a cloud that I believe still tends to hang over all of our utility actions, down to the lowest levels of the company. And so, there's things we need to do there to continue to move things forward. John mentioned this. DSM is not new. It's something that's been going on for a long time. It's a function of 20 years of well-established and accepted industry practices, academic research. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. But we're going through an environment where every year as part of our annual filings with the Public Service Commission, we need to reprove ourselves every year that DSM is the right thing to do associated with cost recoveries. It's not to suggest that we shouldn't be held to a prudency review or a standard, but you have to accept the premise that DSM is important and that some of these things are well established in practice. The other thing is, of course, we operate in a world of DSM, energy efficiency, a world of engineering estimates. And so we have this provability issue all the time before the regulator, and that's a steep hill to climb. Goals and targets, currently on the electric side, as an example, we have 5 average megawatts. It's a goal, it's not an absolute. That's something that can certainly change. Customer behavior, at the end of the day, you can't force a customer to act, but we need to find better ways to find our provide them opportunities or incentives to act, whether it's in the form of incentives or increased payments or the likes. So there's other things that we can continue to do there. External utility program advocacy. Chuck and others have been involved in this and have worked with us for years, and they work hard to help us with those types of programs and help us move things forward. But I can tell you that when we go to Helena and appear before the Montana Public Service Commission, the burden of proof and the hill is very steep if you pay any attention to the activities of Northwestern Energy and the Montana Public Service Commission. So if you believe in this stuff, you think it's important, and you want it to be done, we need help. This is an environment or an area where I think more people could speak up and promote these types of activities so that we can do more and do better and do the likes. The purposes of this panel and this conference, just in closing, is the role of law and policies in providing incentives for energy efficiency. I just talked about some of the barriers, but as a company, we need, what I constantly talk about is sideboards. We need to know the rules that we're going to be expected to play with or within, the sideboards that we should operate in. But once those are established, we should also be judged within those sideboards. We don't have all the answers. Our best bet that we have right now going before the Montana Public Service Commission is that we'll be able to recover our cost or we'll be penalized for not doing the right thing. As a company, owning no generating assets, our transmission and distribution business is the earning assets of our company that provides the financial support for everything that we do. And so if we're penalized for our actions, if we're penalized for doing the right thing because you have somebody that doesn't believe in energy conservation or DSM, that's the best we can do. The best we can do is not recover our cost, or recover our cost or be penalized, for doing a good job is the way I look at it. And so, this is a public policy matter to a large degree, that if we believe this is appropriate as a state, the Montana Public Service Commission, the Montana Consumer Council, the legislature should promote these activities. It's not just the responsibility of the utility for doing these activities. The historical regulatory setting is you do what you think and we'll tell you whether you got it right and whether you can recover your cost. Well, I think that's old world. I think where we're at today is in a new world. We're working together. We need to work on and promote public policy so we can implement these programs, do the right kind of things and do them together. And it's not a matter of judging who's right or wrong, or you should have done this or you could have done that. But when we talk about policies, laws, public policy and the likes, I think we need to do a better job of finding ways to work together. Northwestern Energy is committed to that activity and to those environments. And I'd be glad to talk to you some more, answer any questions as part of the panel. Thanks.
Thanks, Pat. I'm pinch hitting here today for Ralph Cavanna, and the only thing worse than following Ralph to the podium is replacing him on an agenda. So I'll do my best nonetheless. I'd be remiss if I didn't begin by noting what Pat described with respect to the Northwestern Energy's efforts. Northwestern Energy is a pretty easy target for folks in this state, and not without cause and on some occasions, but nonetheless, in fact, they do step up to the plate, unlike any of the state's other utilities. They run a DSM program. They support low-income assistance. They have supported renewable energy development. And in this regard, they are fairly singular among the state's utilities. So they do deserve enormous credit for that, operating in a difficult environment. Now, that's not to say that they couldn't be doing more and better, and we have encouraged them to do so, but I think that their efforts should go noted, or should be noted and should be remarked upon. I will, however, be talking to Pat about what precisely he meant when he said that we indirectly supported him. We have been accused of supporting them to too great an extent by various officials. So at any rate, I'm going to provide a different perspective here than what Pat provided, and a somewhat more 30,000-foot perspective. What Pat was describing is critical, however, in terms of how to get utilities to fully engage in these programs and to spend the time, to dedicate the resources, and to actually achieve the energy savings that need to be acquired. That's critical. I'm going to provide a somewhat broader view, however. And I want to begin here by identifying some of the things that are going on that are promoting and encouraging the acquisition of efficiency, the efficiency resource or demand-side management, conservation, whatever you want to call it, and renewable resources. Then I'll mention some of the legal and policy responses to these developments. First, it's important to recognize that the electric generation business is in a period of great uncertainty right now. And it's this very uncertainty that is leading to energy efficiency acquisition and renewable resource development. So let's start with the natural gas situation. That situation is dominated by concerns over the availability of natural gas and its cost. Now, natural gas prices have risen significantly in recent years, though right now they're down a little bit from their historic highs, recent historic highs, but natural gas prices nonetheless remain extremely volatile and uncertain. And this situation then benefits renewable resources that have no fuel costs and are relatively stably priced, and demand-side management, which is cheap. So that's pushing toward natural gas situation is pushing in the direction of acquiring efficiency and renewable resources. Then you've got the fact of rising utility bills for consumers. You know, this fact has made regulators extremely cautious about approving risky investments. Again, demand-side management programs, renewable resources that do not carry a carbon risk associated with them, are relatively cheap, easy to obtain, relatively easy to acquire, are favored. Next, the next thing that's going on out there is the situation with respect to new resources. New resources are problematic right now because there has been a sharp rise in capital costs. In addition, there's a shortage of engineering and construction firms out there doing these kinds of large projects. You know, it's a global economy, kind of, after all. And that's caused, this shortage is causing these firms to offer to the project developer less favorable EPC, engineering, procurement, and construction contract terms to project developers. So that's raising the end product of energy projects, the end price of energy projects. Again, that disadvantages large capital-intensive projects like coal plants, for example, and makes efficiency acquisition, again, a preferred alternative. Finally, and overarching everything, obviously, all these other factors combined, and all these other factors are tied into this single factor, are issues related to climate. Electric generation that relies on fossil fuel, in particular, you know, coal, is in trouble right now across this country, particularly in trouble here in the Northwest for this very reason. You know, where coal plants are being canceled, they're not able to get financing, costs are going through the roof. You know, it's a huge kind of paradigm shift for the industry. So as I say, all this is working to the benefit of, towards and for the acquisition of efficiency and the acquisition of renewable resources. And so let's talk first about renewable resources and some of the policy developments that have gone on. About half the states right now have renewable portfolio standards. That's simply a standard that requires a particular utility to have a certain percentage of renewable resources in their overall supply portfolio. So it is a way to ensure that renewable resources become part of the electric energy mix, and that customers are being supplied with electricity from renewable resources. Now, these RPSs are so popular, they're even being enacted by ballot initiative, such as Washington State's I-937, which was just enacted last year. And what we're seeing, of course, is considerable growth in renewable energy development across the country, regionally, and growth is just exploding and continuing to proceed apace. Nationally, we went from about 9,100 megawatts of wind in 2005 to about 11,600 megawatts of wind in 2006. That's a 27% increase in installed capacity. This is nationwide numbers, and that's about 20%. That wind production, incremental wind production, represents about 20% of all of the installed capacity in the U.S. last year. So just huge, given where it started from. I mean, this is an industry that has gone from nothing to substantial in a very few years. And in the Northwest, it's the same situation. There's about 1,500 megawatts of wind here in the Northwest right now, all online virtually in the last couple of years. And we project that by 2009, there'll be another 1,500 megawatts of wind. So the renewable resource development will continue undoubtedly. All these factors, everything out there is pushing us in that direction. So turning to energy efficiency, which of course is our cheapest, our fastest, and our cleanest resource, that is also in vogue again. And I say in vogue again because as John and Pat both pointed out, unfortunately, we as a society, as a region, and as a state have not made a consistent effort to acquire this resource. It's been a roller coaster. Some years, based on what's happening out there, some periods we're aggressive. Some periods we don't really put much energy into it. Hopefully that pattern ends now, given our recognition of the importance of this and their value. Oh, in any event, efficiency is being insisted upon across the country. It's being insisted upon by United States Congress, in state legislatures, and regulators, and as we've heard, utilities are doing their part also. Pat mentioned Northwestern Energy's efforts. I'll give you an example from Idaho. After committing just a few years ago to aggressively ramp up their DSM effort, the Idaho Power Company last year acquired 8 average megawatts of energy on their system and 44 megawatts of peak demand reduction on their system, which is a significant amount of energy, significant also because they've been able to ramp this effort up so quickly, and they show no signs of slacking off, and we expect that they will continue to acquire and achieve this degree of savings. I can't think of a utility in the Northwest that isn't making a similar effort here. And by that, I mean a large investor-owned utility. Unfortunately, the cooperatives haven't been as willing, as able to embrace this. I think that's because it takes a significant amount of resources and a commitment to significant amount of resources by the utility and a commitment by the utility to decide to go out and achieve this degree of savings, these savings through these demand-side management programs, and oftentimes cooperatives simply don't have that degree of resources to draw upon. So obviously, too, this issue has resonated with the public. In addition to passing a renewable portfolio standard in Washington State, for example, I-937. I-937 also requires the state's utilities to acquire all cost-effective conservation on their system based on standards that begin in 2010. And about 10 states across this country have passed similar energy efficiency resource standards. And these standards, as I-937, simply require utilities to meet annual electric energy savings targets. So it's a direction by the legislatures of these various states that this is a resource that needs to be pursued and puts a requirement on utilities to in fact do so. And it's not limited to state legislatures. As I mentioned, similar proposals are floating around Congress. The House-passed energy bill, for example, would allow utilities to partly meet its renewable portfolio standards by energy savings on its system. I should have noted that the House of Representatives passed an energy bill along with the Senate. They're going into conference this fall. The House passed energy bill includes a renewable portfolio, a nationwide renewable portfolio standard. It also, as I just mentioned, would allow utilities to fulfill their renewable portfolio standard by energy efficiency savings, partly by energy efficiency savings. And Congress is trying to get at this issue another way as well. Both Senate and House passed versions of the energy bill include strengthened and expanded appliance and product energy efficiency standards, which have resulted in over the years in significant efficiency savings, energy savings. One example of this, and it's probably the shining light example in the whole demand-side management energy efficiency field, is that in 1970, a refrigerator used somewhere between 1,800 and 2,000 kilowatt hours on an annual basis of electricity. And now refrigerators are at about, on an annual basis, about 400 to 600 kilowatt hours of electricity. And that's notwithstanding the fact that in that same period, the size of refrigerators has about doubled. So this enormous increase in efficiency in refrigerators, driven in part by appliance standards. And as I said, Congress is trying to strengthen those standards. In addition, Congress is talking about lighting standards. There was a hearing just last week or the week before on a bill, Bingham and Domenici bill, to phase out incandescent bulbs up to 100 megawatts and to require that their replacements meet lighting standards. So again, requiring energy efficiency and kind of in a very broad scale, similar to appliance standards. So finally, the most effective mechanism to address climate issues and incentivize the development of renewable energy and the acquisition of energy efficiency is establishing a carbon price. I mean, in the end, that's where we've got to get. That's the most important thing. That's what this is all about. It's about climate issues. It's about carbon. It's about changing the way we use energy, the way we produce electricity. And as you all know, or I suspect you know, this issue, establishing a carbon price, is also in play both regionally and nationally. Regionally, it's in play through the establishment of the Western Climate Initiative, which is looking at ways to do precisely that, establish various cap and trade system in all likelihood among about 6, 7 states, western states, and more joining on. And it's also obviously in play in Congress. There are many, many proposals in Congress dealing with establishment of a cap and trade system. So there's an enormous amount of activity out there, but there are also enormous potential for energy savings. So this activity is entirely appropriate, and there's enormous potential for renewable resource development, and all these, both energy efficiency and renewable resources, of course, are basically better for the consumer. They save the consumer money. They protect the environment. They're the direction that we need to go in. So I'll leave you, though, with one of my favorite facts to demonstrate how much we need to do still, and that is that we waste in the production of electricity in this country more electricity than the country of Japan uses to power its entire economy. So I think we have our work cut out for us.
Let's thank our speakers, and definitely want to open it up for questions. And Mr. Volkman said that we should go ahead and turn it over to John Schertz right away. Is there a mic we can get?
Thank you. John asked me real quick to just talk about what the Power Council has doing and a couple of things of resources for people to be looking at. I'm John Schertz. I'm the General Counsel for the Northwest Power and Conservation Council. As John said, under the Northwest Power Act, we do a regional power plan, and it's for the region it's for the area served by the Bonneville system, so it's larger than the Columbia Basin. It's those areas in the Columbia Basin and outside the basin served by the Bonneville system. We put out our 5th power plan at the end of 2004 in the wake of basically the catastrophe, the energy and financial catastrophe of 2001, 2002, and with a lot of essentially competing ideas as to what was the resource future we really need to avoid having these catastrophes and problems in the future. The 5th power plan has a set of portfolio resources in it, renewable and gas and et cetera, but the backbone, and I think, we have a hard-eyed set of technical analysts, but the backbone of it came out again that an aggressive, cost-effective, aggressive conservation and energy efficiency program is still by far the best thing the region could be doing to be on a least cost and a least risk future. And that strategy, that conservation strategy that we came up in the 5th power plan had 2 parts to it. One of them is, and everybody else has mentioned it here, is a steady, ongoing acquisition of conservation and energy. Get out of the roller coaster system. This isn't new. The council said this forever, but I think finally we may get listened to, or all of us who are saying this may get listened to. And the second piece was to ramp up the targets significantly. John has mentioned that the conservation targets in the 1st power plan, we did a good job meeting them, but not quite. But now not only do we think we need to meet them, but we need to ramp them up to a much greater degree. And one of the things Ralph put in the conference materials was a paper we did on what we call conservation, the potential for the achievable penetration of conservation, that gave basically our understanding as to why we thought this is achievable. This is the conservation, cost-effective conservation that the region can acquire in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, and why it's important to go after that. What it did, though, is leave us with a set of challenges, and I'm going to run through them very quickly and I'll be done. One of them has to do with Bonneville. Our legal mandate really is strongest with Bonneville. Bonneville has an obligation to acquire conservation on the loads it serves, but this is part of the act was understood with Bonneville being an engine acquiring a lot of resources to serve load growth throughout the region. Bonneville is just going through what's called the regional dialogue process, where they're essentially recognizing that the idea of Bonneville acquiring resources to serve load growth and meld them with everybody else makes no sense. Bonneville is going to be out of that business in any sort of as a concept. And one of the things we pushed on Bonneville pretty hard was to say, even though you'll be out of the business of acquiring, essentially generating resources for load growth, we still think an aggressive conservation acquisition program at Bonneville is essential. Bonneville has agreed in the general concept in its policy development, but now comes the actual implementation, and there needs to be, I think, a lot of effort and help in working with Bonneville to keep acquiring conservation to meet the targets we have here. Second challenge, and Pat mentioned it mostly, and I won't go into it strongly, we then work with utilities and public service commissions to get individual utilities to try to acquire conservation to meet these targets. There's a lot of issues about equity, a lot of issues about who's stepping up and who isn't, that people need work keeping those consistent over time. A third challenge, and it's one that's a little odd, as Chuck said, resource portfolio standards are very popular. They make me a little queasy. And the reason they make me a little queasy is because they represent the need for very significant investments by the utilities in the region to hit hard targets on the renewable resources. That's all to the good, but I worry to some extent that we're going to be having increasing demand for increasing cost of wind turbines and things like that, and a lot of investments may get swallowed up in resource portfolio standard targets and then lost to conservation energy efficiency. And as Chuck said, that doesn't have to happen. There are ways they can be together, but boy, people need to be watching that very carefully to make sure it happens. One last thing I want to mention, just for people to be two things just aware of. We've talked a lot about wind resources, the need to integrate wind and firming up of wind. That's a significant challenge for the amount of megawatts we're talking about. One problem is the hydro system's a great place to go firm up wind, but the things that you would do to use the system to firm up wind are exactly the things you don't want to do for fish and wildlife. So that's a problem, and then a lot of gas resources are going to come online to firm that up. We need to make sure we do that in the right way. So Council has worked with Bonneville and the utilities to create what's called the Wind Integration Forum. We have a study, a paper out on that. I urge everybody to look for that on our website. And get involved in the Wind Integration Forum discussions as we go through it. The last piece is the Council's technical analysts have just released for draft comment what we call a CO2 footprint paper, and it was an attempt to do basically a quantitative look at the CO2 footprint of the energy system in the Northwest right now, and then look at it in various different scenarios. What would happen if you go this way, what happens if you go that way, to try to establish kind of a baseline for people to be working off as we go through these discussions. It's right now out for draft for public comment. It's on our website, nwcouncil.org, and I urge people to go take a look at it and let us know what you think. Thank you.
Would any of our panelists like to respond, or is there any other questions? Okay, let's thank our panelists one last time. Before closing remarks from Professor Cross, I'd like to turn it over to the two co-conference editors here for a minute.
Hi, I'm Amy Scott Smith, and this is Helen Thigpen, and we're co-editors-in-chief of the Public Lands and Resources Law Review. We just have a couple quick announcements before Ray Cross's closing remarks. First, I want to announce the winners of our silent auction conference artwork. For those of you who won, if you're present, you can meet me at the table after the closing remarks, and you can get your prints and your artwork. Ray Cross won one. Congratulations. And I'm going to butcher this name. It's Adam Liljeblad. Did I completely butcher it? Great. Congratulations. Cliff Bradley. And Beth Brennan. So congratulations to you guys, and I'll meet you after closing remarks.
All right. So, and I just wanted to first make a shameless plug for our journal. As you know, we do this annual conference, but we also put out a scholarly journal each year in the areas, and we publish articles in the areas of natural resource law, environmental law, and Indian law. And we would like to encourage any of you here who are maybe working on an article, or for our speakers, perhaps to turn in part of your presentation into an article for our journal, who is sent to the Supreme Court of the United States, the Ninth Circuit, the Montana Supreme Court, So we would just like to extend that invitation to everyone here who may be interested in publishing an article with us. You can contact any of us with questions for that. Second, I just wanted to thank all of our staff members, editors, everybody who put in an effort into planning this conference. Sarah van der Wettering, it was a huge undertaking and I think a big success, and I think everyone did a great job of spurring the conversation along in this area. But finally, we wanted to extend a special thank you to Kelly Hubbard and Elizabeth White Erickson, our co-conference editors, who really put this entire thing on and put it together. And I think they did a fabulous job, and we would just like to present them with a small token of our affection here, so our print. So.
And thank you all for your comments and dialogue during question and answer. It's really made this conference great. So now I'm going to turn it over to Professor Ray Cross for closing remarks. Thank you.
And I'd like to add my thanks to Kelly and Elizabeth, Sarah, all the great speakers made this conference work. I'd like to just have you sit back and maybe take 10 minutes, and I'll try to tell a few jokes along the way and kind of close out the session in a way that fairly recapitulates what was said. I think the key overriding theme was confronting the twin challenges of global warming and climate change. Their cultural scholars identify two types of knowledge that are needed to confront large social challenges. One is fast knowledge, the how-to knowledge of means. The other is slow knowledge, the why-for knowledge of cultural and social survival and persistence. Thinking about first fast knowledge, the technical side, the how-to side of the ledger. There was this famous Idaho congresswoman, now gone, named Helen Chenoweth. When she was asked about the salmon crisis in the Snake and the Columbia, she said, "Crisis? What crisis? There's plenty of canned salmon on the grocery shop stores." That's sort of the fast knowledge, the easy solution. Did you ever hear the story about when Jesus Christ met that notorious Texas oilman, J. Paul Getty? An interviewer was asking J. Paul, he said, "You know, do you agree with the sentiment in the Beatitudes, Sermon on the Mount expressed by Christ, that the meek shall inherit the earth?" J. Paul turned, thought for a while, and he said, "Yes, the meek will inherit the earth, but not the mineral rights." And that's the sort of story that we've had here in the continent of America. The conflict between fast and slow knowledge. If you think about it, one man in that joke thought about the end of creating and sustaining a people. The other thought about the means of creating the fat wallet for businessmen. I'd like you to think about this idea of how we're going to approach the integration of fast and slow knowledge on a personal, political, cultural level. Let's look at the personal manifestation. And since we're in a law school and near to the business school, I'll use some of those examples. Fast knowledge, the how-to technical knowledge that we convey at the law school or at the business school, is how to become a partner in a large law firm, or for some, a tenured professor at a prestigious university, or perhaps even the CEO of a software company like Google. The slow knowledge that you learn through your family, civic organization, and religions is the knowledge of how to be a good parent, how to be a good spouse, how to be a good brother or sister, or even how to become a good citizen. The integration of those two types of knowledge is essential for the persistence of the American people as a society. Let me talk about leadership examples. Leadership Good leadership integrates both types of knowledge, the how-to and the why-for, the fast and the slow knowledge. Let's talk a little bit about the Anglo-Saxon idea of kingship. Let's take, for example, the good king. Queen Elizabeth, 17th century, made a damn good king. In her reign, you saw the flowering of English arts and letters, as well as the growth of imperial ambition and sovereignty. By contrast, you had a very bad king, Richard III, the only Yorkist king, who rightfully lost his throne to Henry IV. We in America yearn for the good king, for the strong leader. And it may be that with the 2008 election, we'll have the good leader, the good king, that will manifest in the right way the integration of means and ends, perhaps in the guise of a new Queen Victoria. Let's think about politics as means. Other speakers talked about the decline of politics, the fracturing into interest groups, earmarks, the nature of politics today that earn such low marks with the public, the politics of the Abramoffs and the Griles, disconnected from the needs of the people, or the why for cultural and social existence. Let's think of politics as ends, the rise of good leaders and strong vision. Those challenges of global warming requires new leadership who can use the power considerately to forge necessary domestic, regional, international bargains that force sessions of sovereignty and recognizes the wisdom, such as the new Kyoto Protocol, as not a loss of sovereignty, but an integration with a world community on behalf of the American people. So, personal understanding, leadership, and cultural examples. Who are the miner's canary, as Felix Cohen said about any big societal change on the North American continent? The indigenous peoples. Think about the leading effects of climate change and global warming on the Inupiat, the Inuit, the other circumpolar cultures that now lost species, the permafrost, all of those subsistence resources that define the ceremonial, cultural, economic arrangements of a living culture. All of you know about the story of the Exxon Valdez, the natural resource damages cases in which the right of cultural existence brought by many of the Alaskan natives were rejected. There is no right under NRD to cultural existence. So if that's the fate of the circumpolar indigenous peoples, what will be our fate when we face and fail these hard challenges? Fast knowledge sometimes treats slow knowledge as unworthy. A loss of permafrost, loss of native cultures, a loss of species, the loss of indigenous cultures, sort of the price of doing business in the global warming world. Let's think about the American context. One of the difficulties about America is that it was the first invented country some 200 years ago. Invented by what? Political agreement. And the difficult fact is that these founding documents, at least in some scholars' opinions, prioritize the wrong choices. The pursuit of happiness, libertarian rights that don't take account of cultural and social choices that have to be made today. The challenge of a new American identity based on the integration of slow knowledge and fast knowledge still remains. Let me read you a good selection from a book I really like. I suggest it to my students, perhaps I'll suggest it to you. This is a book looking back 13,000 years, looking forward 1,000 years, dealing with, among other things, climate change, by one of the greatest ecologists, an Australian named Tim Flannery called The Eternal Frontier, an ecological history of North America and its peoples. Let's see up to date what the product of fast knowledge has been. The development of a technological America, of unconstrained choice, unconsidered environmental consequences. By the 1950s, North Americans had eliminated about 4/5 of the continent wildlife, cut more than 1/2 of its timber, all but destroyed its native cultures, dammed most of its rivers, destroyed most of its productive freshwater fisheries, and depleted a good proportion of its soils. They had won a great victory in the war and had created one of the most affluent and self-contented societies ever seen. Yet still the pillage of their natural resources was not finished. By 1999, nearly 1,200 native North American species had been placed on the official endangered list. And this is a gross underestimate, for it's been reliably estimated that 16,000 species are in grave danger of extinction on the continent. He closes by asking, was it really necessary to destroy nature in order to create U.S. society as we know it today? Let's look forward 1,000 years. And one of the difficulties of being who we are is that we're burdened by self-knowledge. The dinosaurs, if they had looked up to see the incoming meteorite that ended their reign, what would they have thought? Let's think about that meteorite of global warming. He says, let's look forward 1,000 years. Let's turn our gaze for a moment deep into the future and imagine, in the light of this ecological history, what the United States may be like in 1,000 years. Given the sensitivity of the North American continent to climate change, the greenhouse effect is of special interest. For North America will feel its effects more violently and well in advance of other continents. Many climatologists anticipate rapid warming over the next century. When the Earth warmed by 1 degree Celsius some 4,000 years ago, the Indian societies inhabiting the Southwest collapsed, leaving a parched, hot, mostly uninhabitable landscape. A significant minority of climatologists think global warming will paradoxically hail another advance of ice, increase snowfall at the poles, and it will not melt. As it accumulates, it will reflect the sunlight back into space, causing rapid cooling, follow on the fields of warming and the growth of glaciers. Canada would soon cease to exist as human habitat. People forced to migrate or invade another country. The United States would suffer. Northern cities like Boston, New York would be bulldozed by glaciers and ground into loess. So we know, with some degree, though perhaps administration people may debate the level of certainty, level of competence, what will happen. So what are we going to do in making these choices? And I realize everyone has part of the pieces and part of the puzzle, but it's going to be leadership that puts that puzzle and pieces together into some cognizable, comprehensible, understandable why-for product that can be sold to the American people. You have to admire our lead speaker, Patty Limerick, brave enough, unlike perhaps the rest of us, to put herself out front in a PBS special talking about the eroticism of energy and the need to end the affair. Though telling people to end the affair is not always easy nor heated. So when you think of this idea of how you end the affair and you educate the general public, how the elites speak to them, how the leaders understand and repeat and educate all of us. Think about the great thinkers who have come before us, the giants that have really contemplated much earlier those challenges. One of my favorite is that greatest of all utilitarians, John Stuart Mill. He spoke of something called the steady state economy. And in that sense, what he said, the English people, the elites now have enough. Let's not consume more. needlessly, but let's use the surplus to house the masses, educate the children, feed the poor. Sounds a little bit like the Beatitude, but speaking in a self-survivalist mode of elite persistence. But let's look then at this challenge, this closing, perhaps, of this epic of progress, this demand for conservation, this understanding, as Frederick Jackson Turner once said so long ago, that the idea of the frontier, the realization of termination of frontiers and opportunities, shouldn't be bemoaned, but should be accepted as a challenge to grow as a people. We've created a nation, but we haven't created a people willing to sacrifice those entitlements and to understand their own destiny. So I'd like to close with one of the greatest quotes, I think, from one of the greatest thinkers of this century, Walter Benjamin. He's talking about the end of European society, the failure of imagination, the great wars of World War II and World War II, I and II, that destroyed the flower of their youth, that ended elite rule in most of those countries. But I think it's applicable today. He's talking from a high culture perspective. So those of you that don't believe in high culture, you can close your ears. A Paul Klee painting named Angelus Novus shows an angel looking as though he is about to move away from something he is fixedly contemplating. His eyes are staring. His mouth is open. His wings are fixed. This is how one pictures the angel of history. His face is turned towards the past, where we perceive a chain of events. He sees one single catastrophe, which keeps piling wreckage upon wreckage and hurls it in front of his feet. The angel would like to stay, awaken the dead, make whole what has been smashed. But a storm is blowing from paradise. It has got caught in his wings with such violence that the angel can no longer close them. The storm irresistibly propels him into the future, to which his back is turned, while the pile of debris before him grows skyward. This storm from paradise is what we call progress. If you remember the closing sentiments that Dr. Limerick expressed, she said the new frontier was the re-understanding of progress, the grasp of the closing of one American epic, arguably based on fast knowledge, in favor of the unfolding of a new epic based on slow knowledge, the creation and self-understanding of a people whose persistence and separation from the land spells suffering and death. To reunite the people with the land means that we have to reject the ideas and this disconnectedness that most of us in urban areas and others live so far away through what marketers now quaintly call the supply chain. Helen Chenoweth, perhaps was rightfully so, speaking for a large silent majority, who did think that salmon, both wild and hatchery bred, comes from the shelf, and that there's no difference. Those of you that wish to be lawyers, that are in positions of power, that control the future of the people in relation to climate change and global warming, can't enjoy that luxury. So I'd like to ask you, when you think about these circumpolar cultures and you switch the channel and don't listen about the miner's canary of the indigenous peoples, loss of the polar bear, loss of the seals and the sea lions and the permafrost, think about, that's not that far away from us. I'd like to thank all of you, certainly all the members of the staff, conference staff, certainly all the speakers that did such a wonderful job bringing these important issues to our attention, all those deep thinkers that bring pieces of the puzzle to the table. I'd like to think that soon we'll have those leaders that can put that puzzle into some cognizable form and help all of the people of America and perhaps beyond in the world understand that. If we consume roughly 35% of the energy, perhaps we have 35% or more of the responsibility to do something. Let's each of us shoulder in our small ways and big ways those responsibilities. So thank you for coming to the conference.